So we will have three panel speakers join this panel related to data security. As you can see on the screen, we will have Daniel and Radu join the panel. We are also very pleased to have Maria from Chainalysis to join the panel discussion. I will do a very quick introduction about Maria. Maria is an experienced global compliance and a data professional with over 10 years experience, and she is focused on helping her clients develop strategic and innovative solutions for responsible data use. And I came to know Maria for quite many years. And Maria actually helped all clients with PwC Canada. She also worked at the US, EU, and the UK. Very rich experience in this domain. And so hopefully you will get some insights from Maria today. All right, so that's the quick intro about our panel. Let me stop the sharing here and coming to our panel discussion. And I will be your panel moderator. So two jobs. One is ask questions. The other is on behalf of audience, ask questions. All right. So before we start our panel discussion, since I already quickly introduced the three of our panel members, but I like to give you guys 30 seconds to talk about yourself first. All right, so since Maria just joined first, so Maria, can you do the 30 seconds quick introduction?
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me on one of your events again. Excited to be here. As you mentioned earlier, over 10 years experience in privacy, experience in consulting, most recently leading data privacy at a global fast-growing startup focused on blockchain. Excited to be here with my panelists. I can pass it to Raju.
Hey everyone, I'm Radu Vaduva, Compliance, Privacy and Risk Technical Architect. I've been with Microsoft for 25 years, worked in various roles, in most recently in the past, probably say 8 years, focused specifically on our compliance solution set around Microsoft 365, and I predominantly work in the financial services industry and based out of Toronto.
Excellent. Dan?
Yeah, Dan Sobalski. I am the solution consulting manager for Canada here at Zscaler. And I like to say I manage a team of people who are far smarter than myself, but I've been in the industry for getting close to 2 decades now. And what I bring is not an expertise in privacy for sure. So I'm going to rely on my my fellow panelists for the privacy part. But I've basically dabbled in all things cybersecurity, so I bring a pretty holistic view and angle to things.
Wonderful. All right, thank you very much. Now let's move to our panel questions. And to start with the panel, the first question I like to ask our panel members really is related to the data security threats, right? So as we know, the hackers are changing their strategy, the ways, the tools, there are a lot of news regarding the data compromise. So from your perspective or your observation, what are the most common data security threats today?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one first.
Yeah.
You know, I like to say the more things change, the more things stay the same. I think we see these new threats, they're new names, but generally the methodologies are the same and they're just wrapped in a new technology or a new application, right? And so I think if I could boil it down to some technologies, yeah, we're encrypting more threats. They're hiding them in encrypted tunnels and whatnot. But the real threat this entire time, really, I think, is our end users, right? If you boil down all attacks and all threats, they all boil down to our end users. So I think if we keep our eye on the common threat of our end users and what they're doing and what they have access to, we're going to be in better shape.
All right. So people are still the kind of weakest link. All right,
yes.
Cool. Anyone want to go ahead? Maria, you want to share?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Daniel. I would say employees and users of corporate data are generally part of the problem. And I think a lot of it has to do with lack of awareness, lack of training, clicking on malicious links, opening emails you're not supposed to. And that stems from an overall organizational culture and awareness of what to do, what not to do. So some of these threats are not even malicious in so much that they just don't know what they should or should not be doing. I still see, a lot of challenges with ransomware. There's still phishing. That's happening. There's still a lot of attacks on organizations. I think some of the biggest threats are also coming from the new technology that's being developed, and we're not fully aware of how to actually protect and configure it accordingly. So there tends to be a lot of open doors and also a lot of misuses of the data, whether it's accidentally or maliciously. I'm not sure, Radu, if you want to add anything.
No, I would say I agree with that. Again, from my perspective, the data doesn't expose itself. It's usually the user, and you see, when you look at the community. So everyone who's part of this session, or you get to a website and that's asking you for your personal email and password. We're all pretty savvy, and we'll take a look at, is that the right URL? Do I have a second factor authentication, and so on and so forth. We're kind of an exception, right, to that rule. So usually non tech savvy people will will do something. And it's either that, or they'll be in a rush to do something and they won't fully read or pay attention to what's happening. So education is very important for the end users, but that's where I see most of the risks. And then the other one is not so much in enterprises, although depending on the kind of bring your own device capability for enterprise, is the applications that people use on their various devices and how careful they are, again, with exposing some of private information.
All right. So, okay, Dan, you want to add?
Sorry, something to add to that. I think that's a good point that you bring up on the applications that they use, and maybe I'm remiss for not mentioning that, but especially for BYOD devices and all the app stores that you can use, it definitely has been a problem with people using applications. And in the past, you kind of knew who created the application. Right now, there's so many applications, and it's so easy to publish one that you a lot of time have end users using things that they don't really know who developed it, and they don't understand the code that's working behind the scenes. So that's a good call out, I think, by Radu.
All right, very good. So what I hear, one is user side, the awareness and the training are very important. And Maria also mentioned there ransomware, there's a common like a phishing, and Radu also add on like an endpoint, like all those devices, including the bring your own devices. So all those are kind of attack surfaces for our data, impact the data security. I like to actually add on that one, ask you one more question is about the current working environment. What I mean is because the pandemic, there are a lot of like remote working, like we call it a flexible job, right? So you can work anywhere. So how does those kind of things, how do those kind of things impact data security and privacy for a company?
I can take that. I think as companies have, enabled remote working environments, or has, COVID enabled us to do that, it has limited our ability to have control and accountability over some of the data that we have, also some of our systems. A lot of individuals are working from home, from not secure environments. Oftentimes you can't control the space where phone calls are being taken, how data is being accessed. So it creates a lot of uncertainty and limited control that your InfoSec team has to mitigate the potential threats. When you're in a corporate environment, you can see what data is being accessed. You can also see if data is being printed or any information is being collected, how it's being used. When you're at home, you can also be taking phone calls. You can be have other people that are listening in, and these environments and even your Wi-Fi connection is not always the safest things. While VPN exists, it's proven that there has been a lot of attacks that have occurred. Not sure if my panelists want to add anything to it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And VPN for sure is a high high potential target these days for people because it's published to the internet. It's easy to attack in general. But I would say from a technical perspective, the big change that I've seen is now we have different policies for users rather than have a policy for a user because they happen to be at the office all the time and it was easy to apply policy. They get one policy when they're at the office and they get a very different, usually less comprehensive policy because of the cost of controls and the ability to actually push them out and have them follow the user when they're at home or on the road working from a Starbucks or something like that. Which leads me back to my users being the top threat. Users are smart and users are very good at doing what gets the job done efficiently for them. And so lots of times we'll see users skirting security mechanisms by jumping on a 5G connection where they don't have whatever boxes or appliances have been put out in front of them in remote locations specifically to get around security. So this remote work environment that COVID kind of spearheaded a lot for us has really opened up that particular risk of not having a policy follow a user.
Yeah, and I would add just an example. I totally agree with Maria and Dan. During the pandemic, so as with Microsoft, just to give you an idea, all of the employees at Microsoft have local admin privilege on their corporate devices. And at the beginning of the pandemic, or before the beginning of the pandemic, we used to be able to access our email, SharePoint, Teams, run it on any device. So, my home computer that I built to do demos and, being a gamer, I could go in and run Teams and have the OBS software kind of give me some really cool backgrounds in the meetings with the powerful graphics card. That was great. Microsoft actually decided to implement a policy that the device has to be managed by Microsoft fully in order for us to have access to those corporate assets. And the reason for it is, to Dan's point, was to actually target and ensure that a device is compliant and meets all of the requirements to protect the employee. From a hybrid work perspective, to Maria's point, unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. When you look at the work environment at home, you have very little control. You have, and I know this is so 2010, but you have a lot of these devices like Alexa and Google and all of the Apple devices that they could possess a threat to a corporation because they are listening, right? They're in a listening mode. You never know what's being collected and stored. So that's definitely changed quite a bit the environment. And from a policy perspective, I can tell you a lot of these, let's call them consumer grade capabilities for automation that make our life easier at home have been deemed as a threat to corporations in a hybrid environment.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'll say the OBS software only works well when it doesn't crash mid-presentation.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's so true. And also, I think somebody put a comment like when you're outside of the corporate environment, there are some like a physical security things, like say you're working at home, there's a physical security part, and somebody can even simply just, regardless of what's your protection there, somebody can easily take a picture, right? So
Mhm.
nobody can tell, right? So
Yeah,
screenshot, all those kind of things can happen.
yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a comment in the chat about that and saying like, hey, it's cool that you can isolate, but what about, printing, screenshotting, taking a picture, just reading it, right? And that goes back to the making sure that least privilege is in place, right? Only the people who are supposed to have access to certain pieces of information have access to it, and at least limiting the footprint so that you can track who is actually accessing that.
Right. So right now, people are everywhere to access the data. Let's look at it from another angle. Where are your data, right? So in typical corporate environment right now, organization can use all kind of tools, like including public cloud, hybrid cloud, private cloud, and their on-premises environment, and SaaS solutions. So my question will be, how can organizations effectively manage and secure the data everywhere, like data in cloud, and some company like have a lot of IoT devices. So how to manage all those data in so many places? Dan, you want to give a first try?
I was waiting to see who would get called on there. No, I think that's a really good question, and I would say again, I'll give you the practitioner's technical answer, and then I'm dying to hear what the privacy side has to say about it. But to me, I would say pivot to focusing on identity and destinations. The destinations we can lump in with the data, right? We've got to start providing a specific identity access to data rather than providing a user access to a network and then trying to block stuff at that point and ensuring that they only find their way to the correct thing, right? Very specific access rather than the broad trust-based model that we've been doing. And there are ways to wrap identity around, you said IT and IoT devices where you can't put supplicants, you can't put software on there that's going to give them a user ID, for example, but there are ways to wrap an identity around those things as well when you can't put an agent. So I think it's doable. And then I would just say, again, from a technical perspective, taking what we have and virtualizing it and pushing it into the cloud isn't necessarily the best approach, because we're just taking the same problems we've always had and then just multiplying them in the cloud, right? We're not really changing our approach at all. And there goes my green screen again. OBS for the win, right? So.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Anyone want to add on Dan's question regarding the identity and also like a best practice? Okay, you're back. The background.
I guess to add from the data privacy compliance side of things, this takes us back to overall third-party risk management. As we're utilizing some of these technologies like cloud or IoT or whatnot, we're certainly partnering with different companies to provide those services for us. So I think we do need to be mindful of what their practices are when it comes to our data. Where are the servers held? What's the data access look like? How is our data not merged with data of other companies? Like, how do we look at data transfers? Data privacy legislation is a big thing, and cross-border data transfers coming from Europe to the US is a very hot topic. So, and a lot of organizations, especially those in the public sector, or those that are heavily regulated, there's a lot of requirements around transferring data, making sure that there is enough configuration done that data is not merged with others. A lot of clients that our company works with, or other ones that I've worked with, they do have specific audit requirements. So it's really important to ensure that the third-party risk management is in fact correct. You're looking at your contractual obligations, you're looking at privacy legislation, you're looking at the overall controls. Are those third parties, do they have SOC reports? Are they ISO certified? Like, what do their practices look like? Can they provide those attestations that your data will in fact be responsibly used when you are using it? And just because you're outsourcing, it does not mean accountability is outsourced as well. So
basically, you need to do your due diligence to understand the requirements. Radu?
Yeah, I mean, totally from both a privacy and a technical perspective. I don't know that I have anything to add. It is all of those, and you know, when we look at the as a vendor, right? When we look at working with specific customers in highly regulated industries like the banks in Canada. It's always interesting to go through a digital crown jewel assessment that a lot of the organizations have or do on a regular basis every 2 or 3 years, whatever the cadence is. Because that, to Maria's point, does extend to above and beyond just, hey, is your Exchange server encrypted, encrypts mailbox data at rest? It goes above and beyond that, where you have, any of the Canadian banks will have North America as well as Europe or Asia presence, right? So from that perspective, data transfer is also very important.
All right. So 3 important things I hear. One is about the identity. So the game is changed, right? So because the data everywhere is not within your corporate boundary, so identity becomes more and more important. And you also need to know what do you have. Really, you need to understand your data. What's your data need to be protected. Then you also need to understand all those regulatory requirements, like Maria pointed out. Okay, cool. Let's move on to a little bit privacy questions because we ask a lot of data security questions. So data privacy. There are a lot of changes in security domain, but privacy domain also has quite many evolutions. So can you describe to us kind of the evolution of data privacy today? What kind of major things we need to pay attention to? So with that, maybe Maria, you can start.
I can take that. So, I mean, over the last 5 years, we've really seen a push in privacy legislation. So, GDPR has really pushed away for ensuring the global standard of how personal data is used, providing individual rights, making sure organizations are accountable. What that did is it really paved way for other countries to really look at their adequacy requirements. It really pushed for the US to really get on board, to introduce something called the CCPA, which is a California legislation, which is now transcended to CPRA, that is looking to provide closer to GDPR considerations. I won't say adequate because the US is not adequate. But it's also caused Canada to review its privacy legislation that is long overdue. Right now, Canada has adequacy standards. And what I mean when I say that is if you have adequacy standard to GDPR, that means you can transfer data from Europe to Canada because there's adequate considerations. But what Canada has done is Canada has introduced Bill C-27, which is looking to essentially replace PIPEDA, which is a federal privacy law, and Bill 64, which is now a legislation in Quebec, which has received royal assent and is becoming fully operational in 2023. So it's Bill C-64 is now the GDPR-like bill of Quebec. So there's requirements around having a privacy officer, a data privacy impact assessment, mandatory breach notifications. So in other provinces like BC, Ontario, and Alberta are also looking to modernize their laws. But if we look beyond just Canada, there is cross-border transfer discussions, which continue to be a topic and a pain for a lot of organizations. Ever since the dismantling of Safe Harbor and Max Schrems and the introduction of Privacy Shield, we really can't get to a good state. We have tried, but right now we're relying on standard contractual clauses, which are not proving to be very worthwhile. And there's a constant debate around, is US adequate? Can European data be transferred? And when you have global technology providers that are producing cloud services to European citizens coming from the US, it really creates kind of a heated political discussion. So what we're seeing in addition in Europe, there's a lot of changes in privacy legislations. AI is a big topic of discussion. So there's the AI Act, there's the Digital Services Act, data governance, and so on. And with the privacy framework that was introduced between the EU and US last year, there's hope that it's going to get passed by mid-2023, but I wouldn't hold my breath because, this has been a topic for discussion for many years, and Max Schrems seems to find a way to fight it. And for those that don't know who he is quite known within the privacy community for really instilling privacy regulations and really ensuring that the rights of individuals are addressed. But having said that, the US is also enhancing its state-by-state protection. We've seen the CCPA in California, we've seen the Consumer Protection Act in Virginia come into effect in January, and as well as a number of other laws that I haven't mentioned. I mean, at a federal level, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the US, and we're probably not going to see blanket federal coverage, but we are getting closer. And what we're seeing is a huge need for uniformity when it comes to privacy legislation. Having to build a program that complies with all these requirements is extremely expensive, and it's also extremely difficult to achieve because often you're missing some of these regulations. So, you can hope for the best, you can try for the strongest standard possible, and you can look for where you need it, where needed, you can adjust. But, privacy continues to evolve, and we're going to see way more changes, especially with new technologies that are coming out, especially with AI, and we're moving towards just privacy compliance, but more towards ethical uses of data.
Wow, this although I couldn't remember all the regulation names, but the general impression is that the more and more coming, and the more and more challenging things need to be for the company need to be implemented. Thank you very much, Maria, to share with in 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, give us the overview about the privacy evolution. So now I change the gear to Dan and Radu, because you guys are more on the security side, Radu kind of in between on the security. So how, as a security professional, how security and privacy work together then? Speaking specific to data.
I can start. It's interesting because when we look at security and privacy, typically, and I'll give you kind of the background from a Microsoft perspective, majority of the sellers that we have in the organization focus on the IT side, right? Which is typically in your question is the CISO side, so information infosec teams within organizations, which have a very important role within organizations and implement a lot of technologies. However, to Maria's point, and she is out of all of us, I think, I'm speaking on behalf of Dan and Brian, but she is the privacy guru here. The privacy, let's call it the privacy office or department of any organization does have a different lens than the InfoSec team. Do they work together? Absolutely, from a specific set of programs, processes, technology, acquisition, and implementation. But they typically privacy, a chief data privacy officer within an organization, because of the regulations that the organization has to typically adhere to, has more pressure on him or her in that role. So yes, they work together. There is more, I would say, pressure from that side. Although with InfoSec, whenever you have a breach within an organization, InfoSec is usually the one who has to to go and fix it. So they have to wear that Superman cape. But that's my kind of my take on it. It's definitely there's the requirement for both of those roles.
Yeah, I would add to that, and I would say a reminder to everybody is that, if we look at privacy regulation, that is forcing a business decision within any organization. And we look at security controls, those are just the technical implementation of the controls that the business decision is saying need to be in place. So they're not opponents in this conversation. One is just the technical enforcement of the regulation and what is required for the business itself. So how do you comply with privacy and regulations while maintaining data security? I'd say they walk hand in hand. You can't do one without the other, quite frankly.
Right.
I would add to that. A lot of privacy regulations, if not all of them, have requirements that speak to security within them that say, you must ensure the security of the information that you process, you collect, and even those that your sub-processor collect and protect. I will say though, after so many years in this field, I'm still seeing a lot of silos between organizations when it comes to security and privacy. Like what I'm finding is that they're often doing the same job, but they're kind of approaching it from different lenses and they don't communicate together, right? Like our goal and our objective is to ensure the security of our crown jewels data, not just personal data, but like our intellectual property, our, confidential data, our employee data, not just that of our customers. So what happens is there's often, not a joint vision, not a joint strategy. The target operating model is not even there. And there's a waste of resources that happens because you often see the security team creating their own GDPR program and then the privacy team creating their own GDPR program, but they're not really aligned. They're not speaking to each other. And so what needs to happen is for both teams to really ensure that they're key partners at those decisions and they're really, working together to make those business decisions. And part of it is even reviewing new technology that comes through. You should have a panel that has your security, your privacy, and anything that gets introduced into a company has both of these teams really, playing a key role. We can't do, one job without the other team. Unfortunately, privacy still is very much fighting for budget, while security is a little bit further ahead and does have that seat at the table. So, privacy is getting there, but I do think we need to do better and we do need to work together. And a lot of it has to do with understanding our jobs to ensure that we know what role we play together and how do we fix it.
I would assume that privacy should be starting to get some more budget now, because I think from my outsider perspective, I'm thinking what I noticed the most about all these new regulations is they have teeth to them now and they have real financial penalties, right? So I think that should at least help the budget argument.
It should. You know what really helps a budget argument is after you have a breach, you get all the budget you want. What I think the disconnect is sometimes in that the decisions you make with data and how you process data can sometimes be more monumental than, a breach that happens where it's like a malicious insider or like a malicious attack of some sort, right? Like you can make creepy decisions about your customers that might impact them. You can have reputational impacts, but also data breaches can occur when, you miss mail people or you lose documents and such, right? So I think, we do need to make that distinction. And I think budgets are getting better, but they're still like substantially significant. What I saw in consulting and what I see today with speaking with my colleagues, privacy still has to fight. And what's helped us is the use of like new privacy tools, but InfoSec, as someone said earlier, I don't remember if it's Radu or Daniel, is like you wear your Superman capes when a breach occurs and, privacy is like running after you trying to get a word in. So it's getting there, but it's going to take some time.
Very interesting. Yeah, I like what Miriam pointed out, breaking the silos, right? So, because at the end of the day, once there's an incident happen, like a data breach or privacy, so everybody got impact. Doesn't matter you're in security, in privacy, maybe there's other team like, for example, developers, because they all need to know, those concepts, although may not be very in depth, but they need to have that awareness for each other about the privacy, data, security, and kind of a best practice. I think Radu, in your presentation, also have security by design, right? So, or privacy by design.
Yeah.
So those are the things, right? So the earlier you can do it, right? So and rather than push it to the last. So those are the things we need to pay attention to. All right, let's move on. I think Maria also touched on the emerging technologies. We all know the AI really changed the things, and also the like a blockchain could also have a great impact to especially for data security and privacy. And recently, I guess quite many people also get your hands on those like a chat GPT kind of things, right? So you see the power, get a feeling about the power of the AI. So how do those emerging technologies can really impact the data security and the privacy? How can we handle that?
That's an interesting one. I really am dying to hear what Maria has to say about the blockchain stuff. I think I told her that when we chatted before, but from my perspective, I'll give you an example. ChatGPT as an example, but it could be any AI engine, right? And so some of the things that people can do with that are, have it write code. And I've spoken to developers who have put in pieces of malware code and said, write me a variant of that. And one of the things that we're always trying to do is figure out what does a particular piece of malware look like, and then they'll repack it, which is what they'd call it, repackage it, so that it doesn't get caught in the same engines, and then send it through again. And I think the potential for it to become very, very easy to rapidly transform malware and attacks using this technology is there. And so we've obviously got to find a way to adapt our tooling to keep up, which is always, I mean, it's been like that since the dawn of InfoSec to begin with, right? And then the other thing that I'm curious what the other panelists think, but I was talking to someone about this, and they said, you don't really know what these engines are really doing with their data a lot of the time. And you could say, write me whatever, I want to name my baby something based on my mom's name, and it's going to ask you, well, what's your mom's name? Okay, well, now it knows your mom's name. What's it doing with that information? I don't know. Right? So there's a certain bit of information there that we've got to figure out what it's actually doing with it in the back end. And then the last comment that I have is specifically on things like blockchain. And I told Maria I'm a blockchain enthusiast, so I probably know more than the average bear, but I'm not an expert in it. And I can tell you that the misunderstanding in the general public and probably and regulators around how the technology actually works is incredible. And so just the sheer learning curve to keep up with how the technology works, let alone figure out how to protect it, is immense. And we've got to up level there for sure.
Yeah, that's a great comment and also great questions. So I'm curious about to other panel members. What's your opinions on those things?
Yeah, so maybe Daniel, you probably know more than blockchain than I do then, if you're a huge enthusiast. But from what I'm seeing, some of the concerns around ChatGPT, like obviously, the volumes of data collected is quite large, and sometimes some of the things that have pointed out that data is collected without consent. There is a need to use large data sets to train the algorithm. So there's discussions of data scraping from multiple sources, and that results collection of data without consent, inability for individuals to exercise data privacy rights because they don't know how their data is being processed, and then even just potential use of that information for profit without that, consent and accountability, data transfers, as we're going back to it as well. I mean, kind of from a blockchain perspective, there's a lot of discussion, and there continues to be a lot of discussion about it. But certainly some of the things that come to mind for everyone is around like accountability. It's often difficult to make an assessment in who's responsible for determining the means of processing as you know, it's designed in a decentralized system. Like, who is the data processor? Who is the data controller? Also, you know, minimization and purpose limitation come to mind. As data is stored in blocks that are linked together, creating like an ever-growing network of data that's essentially contained in perpetuity. So it creates a risk of over retention, minimization of the data, going back to reduced presentation around that, which also creates it difficult for individual rights because data is retained forever. How do you delete it? What do you do there? And then because the technology is often stored and access to globally, there's risks when it comes to cross-border data transfers again, and then applicability of legislation, and then having regulators to and enforce it. Where does the data sit? How do you make those decisions around it? So obviously there's a lot of issues around it, and certainly it's a new technology, but it's not for both of them. And I think, you know, the legislation and how we're regulating these technologies are far behind. So I think a lot of businesses are surely trying to make those decisions of what do they consider responsible, how are they accountable for that information, and what do they do? Well, what is considered the best practice? And I think a lot of these technologies we're still learning, and we're still trying to figure out what to do with them, essentially.
That's so true. Radu, do you want to add anything on that?
Not a lot more, but it definitely from a new technology perspective, and when you look at it, and you look at things like ChatGPT, right? I heard the other day, or I was reading somewhere that there's a teacher assistant at a university in the US now trying to build an algorithm where they can detect essays submitted by students that were written by ChatGPT. So when you think about that and all of this new technology, there is that unfortunate human factor that could be turned or used for bad, or in this case, cheating purposes, that shows up. And to Maria's point, organizations have to be very careful when they release these types of technologies, and have a responsible AI program in place, right? That again honors the human right of data privacy.
Mhm. Yeah, so like a chat GPT, right? So it's so powerful. I do see some like use case, very simple. It can help you to write email. But think about hacker. They can also help hackers write phishing emails, right? So a lot of some best practice before is to check the grammar, check the way they are using English. But now you may get a perfect English like a phishing emails, very professional, very logic things, right?
Yeah, I will say specifically that particular application, it delivers its answers and responses with a lot of confidence, whether it's right or wrong. And it's wrong a lot of times, but it
Yeah,
delivers it with such confidence that you don't know what to believe at
yeah,
any given
that's so
point.
true. So at the end of the day, you don't know who you are dealing with. Is that a true person, or is that a machine, or is that bot, or some like kind of a mixed? So that's actually make things more complex. Um, all right, so that's about emerging technologies. We kind of like reached to the end of our panel discussion. We actually touched quite many things, starting from the threats. We talk about the evolution of data privacy, the remote work, we talk about cloud, IoT, emerging technologies. But today, our focus, the theme is data security and privacy. We touch on many things. But before you go, if you can only recommend one thing, although there are so many things, but top of your head, what kind of things is you really want to tell or suggest our users, our audience to do? So what would be your top recommendation regarding the data security and privacy? Only one.
I'll go first, and I'll keep it to a data security. And I want to be very clear that this is a data security recommendation, not a privacy recommendation, because
Okay,
it
we leave
flies in the
to
face, I
Maria.
think, of some of the ability for end users to control their own data. From a data security perspective, I would say if there's one thing that I could have, it would say strive to take security decisions out of the hands of end users at all cost. Educate them about best practices and build it so that it's just the way that they behave. But the more you give them a choice to either do the secure thing or not do the secure thing, the more you're exposing yourself to risk. So at all costs, take away the decision from them and just make it a seamless experience if possible.
So really have some control there, right? So about the data decisions.
Again, around security, not privacy.
Okay, good. All right. So who wants to give you a top recommendation? Yeah, it's a
Brett, who's dying to.
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
I'll go first. You go next. I would say, wow, one recommendation is very hard. If I have to say one, I will say don't treat data privacy as like a compliance exercise. It's not a check the box and we're done. It has to be an ongoing effort, and it has to be a culture, organizations collectively have to approach it from all angles, and privacy is moving away from just complying with legislation, but it's really moving towards data trust. How are we enabling our relationships with our customers? How are we doing good when it comes to data? What a lot of customers are expressing is that they're more inclined to share data if they feel that the organization is being accountable and responsible for the data. And the only way you can recommend that is by having an evolving data privacy program that really moves as the legislations change, as the technologies change, and as your business practices change, so that privacy is embedded with your values, which means privacy is not just a compliance exercise. It has to be a living and breathing thing.
excellent. Just like security, follow like complying with the regulation is a kind of a minimum, right? So, but change the mind. I like what Maria pointed out. Really, is we need to treat, including security and privacy, as an enabler, as enable your business to give you the edge for competition or give you the business to move to next level, rather than only consider that as an obligation. You have to finish these things to comply with something. And that will change the game. All right, very good. Radu, what's your part?
And I need to tag on to that because I think there's multiple again from Maria's talking point around a program. Mine, I would say, end user education. That's the number one. Definitely take the guesswork out of their hands. We know users have employees and users have always mishandled data. Like you'll run into this in any organization. So that's why it's important to have that education and make it an evolving something that's living and breathing, right? It's not a set it and forget it ever. And especially with the privacy legislations that I strongly believe are going to come about, and I'm sure the privacy departments will get quite the budget for that because they will be enforced with heavy fines. But that end user education is very important to the culture, to get an end user to understand this is the impact that you're having on the reputation of the company, of the organization, right? And make it stick or carrot, whatever the approach is as an organization. But it is something that is important.
Excellent. Very true. All right, so to wrap it up, so this is a great panel discussion. We've walked through quite a lot of best practice regarding the data security and the practice. And speaking of myself, my top recommendation really is you join those kind of events often, right? To learn from the experts and keep yourself current, right? Because this industry is moving so fast, including security and privacy. So you need to keep learning and also follow the industry trends. All right, so speaking of the industry trend, we kind of actually finish all today's session. And thank you very much for joining. We spent almost like 2 hours here. So thank you, everybody online. I really appreciate your participation. And to our three panel members, speakers, really appreciate your help and your insights. And I like to ask everyone online to give them a virtual applause or virtual pat. Thank you very much for coming to share your insights.